His voice is probably heard more than the president's. He's the popular host of radio's American Top 40 and TV's America's Top 10. Here is Casey Kasem.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, that is a recognizable voice. I bet you can go places when people aren't looking at you, and when you speak to them, they probably look up and...
That's true. They can usually identify my voice. Telephone operators instantly will, if I'm calling and saying, this is a collect call, they say, you're Casey Kasem, and it's amazing.
That's wonderful.
Box boys, but the normal person, if, for instance, if I'm in line in a theater and I'm talking with my wife, somebody will turn around and say, Casey. I mean, they won't even do it. So I've been very lucky. The voice has been on a lot and around the world. And
how did it start? Who first discovered that voice, that it had something special?
Well, you know, I never considered that I had any kind of voice at all. As a matter of fact, I sort of had to overcome a handicap when I was a kid. I was a sound effects man. Whenever they put a crew together, and they say, well, now, Casey, you do sound because you don't have a voice. You know, you've got a younger person's voice. So as I grew up in radio and in school, that's what would happen. Then I was lucky enough to recognize that that young person's voice that I had, and not that big, booming, mellow voice, became really the door opener, because I started doing young voices on the Lone Ranger show. And then as my voice got a little bit older, it developed into 25-year-olds, and I started playing character parts on that show on the radio in its waning days back in Detroit.
Now, as it usually happens, somebody who makes their living with this, if an illness of any kind, if you get a cold, it settles right in the voice box usually, you know.
And you know, Mike, I've learned that through the years, I used to worry about it all the time. Particularly around the time when I was in Cleveland, Ohio, I did a show that was very much a screamer. I played heavy R&B music, and I was really cooking and rocking every night.
And you had to shout over it.
And shouted over it, and really wanted to groove with the... Well, by the time a year went around, I could barely talk.
Oh, my.
So I ended up at the University of Michigan, and they had to take a sliver off of my vocal cord, because what had happened is I'd abused the voice so badly. Well, singers do it.
Like a nodule, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little nodule, and it was benign, of course.
Very tedious operation.
I'll bet.
Oh, very tedious. Do you do anything on the basis of keeping your voice in top form? Do you do anything daily, any ritual?
I think I have
like
to stay out of air conditioning.
Ah.
I find that if I go to a studio to do commercials, even when I do my radio show, I turn the heat on. It's about 80 degrees in my radio show.
Good.
And in the summertime, if the air conditioning goes off on my TV show, I welcome it.
You don't mind that at all.
Everybody else is sweltering, and I'm having a ball. I love it warm.
You have been counting down America's top 40 for years. Now, is it my imagination, or are there more new groups with big hits these days?
I think what's happening in popular music is there are some stations that are cropping up across the country, and maybe we're getting a cycle of the way it was back in the mid-'50s. And that is adventuresome disc jockeys, program directors, and they're just beginning to happen now, because we've had a period over the last 10 years, well, say 4 or 5 years, where there haven't been a lot of new groups breaking out. But there's a new kind of sound, new. It's old, but it's called new wave. And it's starting to happen. There's a station in Los Angeles that's done very well, breaking new acts that no one ever heard of, and they're starting to pop open all over the country.
A lot of acts coming out of Australia. The first I heard of was the Association, and now there are a couple of others that are hitting it big.
The big act now that has the #1 song in the country is Men at Work, right? And they're doing very well. And
look at my producer almost fainted that I had that. You know.
Did you know that?
He doesn't remember that we played it on the show the other night. He goes to lunch occasionally while we're on the air, you see.
This is the man who had a top 10 record back in 1966. Went to number 6. That's right.
I have a Billboard thing of my record where it got to number 3, and the only 2 records above it were the Beatles. And I don't feel too badly.
Not at all.
That's when the Beatles had #1 and #2, which I don't think has happened too often in our business.
Not too often. They, at one time in 1970 or 1964, when they first hit, in April of that year, had the first 5 records, and that was the first time in the history of the charts.
Will we ever see anything like that again?
The Beatles?
In the business, like a group that becomes that
I'll tell you why I don't think so. Now, if you'll remember, when Elvis Presley hit, he was with RCA.
Yeah.
He had made a few records on a smaller label from Tennessee.
Sun Records.
This man knows.
Well, trivia is my game.
Well, you'll remember, though, that when RCA hit, they would put one record out at a time. when the Beatles had the first 5 records on the chart in April of
They had to be released at the same time.
they were on 4 different labels.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Now, if any one of those labels would have had the Beatles and realized what they had...
That'll be the next group that hits.
They would never in a million years have released all those records at the same time.
No, and now they're doing something that's unusual and different. They're releasing records with only one side.
That was to save some money.
Do you think?
Why not? I think so. It's better all the way around. They don't have to pay double royalties to the songwriters. They don't have to go to the expense of producing another session for the other side. If they do get a hit, they haven't wasted maybe a second hit on the other side. I think it's a good idea because I always bought a record just for the one side, but surprised that I found after a few months that I liked the other side too.
Yeah.
What was on the other side of your record? The Man in My Little Girl's
Life, I think it was, I don't even remember.
I know. That's why I don't think
some
people
guys walking around saying, boy, I don't know, but I'm glad it was on the other side of it.
Sure, he got the royalties,
I remember
right?
years ago, I ran into a songwriter. He had the song on the other side of a record that I had, which was #1 when I was with Casey Kasem, Old Buttermilk Sky. And he said, boy, I'm sure happy about your record. I said, but Hoagie wrote the song. He said, no, I got the flip side. That's interesting.
People have made a lot of money.
What about the slump, Casey, in the record business? How do you feel about it? Is that going to ease up?
I think it will. I think that what's happening now is things come in cycles. And I think there's a cycle right now with the record industry. With what's happened with the video games, that's taken a lot of the money. But at the same time, the record industry was doing so very, very well back there in the mid-'70s. I mean, making enormous amounts of money.
Yeah.
What has happened, of course, you recognize, too, is that there's a new phenomenon taking place, and that is about 40 million people are not buying albums, but taping them from someone who has bought it, and then that's happening. And
the kids are doing that.
So there's $1 billion worth of royalties out there that somebody isn't getting, and money that is being that isn't being funneled into the music business.
There's not a way of correcting that, in my opinion.
I don't think so. I think it's just one of the things we're going to have to live with.
Yeah.
And while it's difficult, because I think singers and I think record producers and I think people in the industry, after suffering so much humiliation, after working 12 and 15 hours a day, when they make it, they deserve to make it big. And I've always felt, and that's what my whole show is about, really, is to showcase, to spotlight the people who have worked hard all their lives, and knowing that maybe one day they'll get one hit record and that'll open a door.
Yeah. Please stay for our next guest.
Oh, thank you.
Casey Kasem is going to stay, and we'll be right back with the Gap Band.
Baby, you just